Right. Welcome to this program. While we were designing the whole program, one thing was very clear from REVA as well as Shinu's side that this program should not be like another certificate program that covers a lot of theory, right? What is most important is the practicality of the whole content, right? So content is okay. We can all define contents. We are all. I mean, you can also define contents. You've been doing this for like many years. I'm sure the average year experience was what 9.5, right? So I'm sure you all understand the concept, right? What we wanted to do is bring it to a practical experience for all of you, right? We started off and then we are evolving, right? We speak about that as well, and in the second half, Shinu's going to cover the topic as such, right? So I'll be also around. Now, in the presentation out here, I'm talking about some of the trends. Why I've been talking on this trend is to relate to what you're doing today, right? I'm sure most of you are into either IT or some level into cyber or already into cyber, right? Or infosec. These are some of the domains that you will be working, right? So we're trying to see how we will align to that, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the trends. You also heard in Mr. Ratan's session, things have changed in the last year or so, right? I mean, work from home has been one of the new norm, right? Earlier it was like, no, you need to come to the office and work. We will not be giving you certain access at home. That is no more the case, right? You are all allowed to access anything and everything. Now, before I start, I may ask a couple of you to just help me understand. I've not been able to interact with you, during your onboarding, time. What was the assessment of yours, considering this to be as a program? Did you see that I'm going to get an MS degree or an MTech degree, or it could be a one-year program that's a PG diploma degree, or you looked at the content and you understood, okay, these are things that we will be doing in our day-to-day, professional, careers, or what was the reason why you checked? Okay, fair enough. So in the previous session, whatever you've heard from Ratan, right, we've been going to cover most of those topics, right? A threat modeling approach, right? What is VA? How do you ensure your risk from an organization perspective is well defined? I mean, not the, you would have, if you're into that domain, you would understand the organization do a risk assessment, but eventually what happens is you are required to either cover it, accept the risk and move on, right? And that becomes your actual problem. Second, threat, a threat landscape, right? For any organization, including individuals, you need to be understanding what is the threat landscape, right? What could be the threat? So you would have heard about the lateral movement, and then I've also understand Ratan would come and talk about lateral movement. I'm talking about that scenario one bit out here. Now, when there is a lateral movement that happens, okay, there are identified vulnerabilities and threats that gets compromised, okay, and then you move from one system to another system, one network to another network. You may be on the cloud or you may be in your organization and you get connected, right? As you're moving laterally, compromising one system to another system. What is important to first understand the risk for your organization and the threat dimension of your organization, which is in short term, we call it the threat modeling, right? So we'll take you through some of the threat models as well. Prior to that, we'll explain you what is vulnerability and risk, okay? Earlier in your sessions, which is going to start from the next week itself, we will introduce you to networks, right? The preliminary identified networks, the layer 2 switching, layer 3 switching, routing. How do you introduce firewall into it? What are the different kinds of firewalls, right? What are application aware firewalls, right? So these are some of the topics that we will cover. You may have known most of it, you would have worked on a lot of it, but we will go a bit more detailed and starting from the basics, right? So we will start with the OSI model. I'm sure you all have heard about OSI model. You've all heard TCP, IP models. You've all heard subnetting, right? So these are some of the concepts that we will take, right? Then we move to the controls. I spoke about some of the controls. We will go to some advanced level controls as well. We will introduce you to different areas, which is cloud specifics. Okay. We will introduce you to, the vulnerability management program, right? We will take you to penetration testing methodologies, right? So you may not have done that, but we will explain you how to do a PT, right? So we will be able to give you those scenarios. And one most important area that we would be covering is the cyber range. So there's one module where you will be given 15 to 16 scenarios, attack scenarios, right? Now these attack scenarios will be played. You will actually be able to detect it. You will be able to flag it. And then comes the next of the modules where you have the SIM, one of the technologies with the IBM QRadar, post which we will take you into identifying. So identify the various attack scenarios, respond to it, right? Remediate them, okay? And orchestrate them, which is a SOAR platform, right? So we will take you through all of these steps, okay? And we will take you into multiple areas, like we will take you to cloud, we will take you to the organizational network, right? Hybrid networks and so on, okay? So this should cover a fairly good amount of your understanding to what cyber is all about, right? Then we've got some elective topics. Okay, I'm not sure if they got introduced, but some elective topics which will be in the areas of risk, in the areas of cyber law, right? Privacy. So these are some of the areas that you could also venture into, right? So typical InfoSec kind of programs. Okay, so that is purely your choice. What we would like you to do in the next year and a half is you'll be introduced to two capstone projects where a lot of us would be the mentors on different projects. There would be journals that would be published, research papers that would be done, right? So these are your thought process, or we will work with you to come up with some ideas. I mean, you may be doing something within your organization, like one of the previous batchmate working in SAP. So what he's done is identified the various configuration and vulnerability challenges with SAP as an ecosystem, right? And he's actually automated it. So this was one of the areas that was looked up, and it was well appreciated by the industry, right? So that is something which you could also look at. Okay, moving ahead. So I'm not going to take you much of your time. I'll take about 20 minutes. That okay? I'll skip this. Okay, so some of the drivers, some of the market drivers that we look at, okay, which you would actually see from the previous year to the current year and in the year coming forward, right? About 30% of the organization will spend on GDPR related consulting and implement. Yeah. So have you heard of GDPR? What is this? Law? Is it a regulation? Is it a framework? Have you heard of it? Anybody? No? It's a regulation. Yeah, rightly said. User data. Yes. So very similar to GDPR, you got other regulations as well, right? So if your organization is, let's say, doing business with a customer in the European Union, and you do carry personal identified data, right? Then this is one of the regulation you need to abide by. Okay. So there is CCPA, and the one that is going to come in the as a law, as a regulation in India. What is that? Has anybody heard? It's a form of GDPR. Yeah. Indian Privacy Act, right? So we are eagerly waiting for it. Okay. And there are already talks, right? How is it going to impact a lot of organization? How is it going to impact individuals? For us, it is good because we will have another domain, right? For where we could also start applying for. So privacy is one of the areas that you could also venture in. I mean, of course, very much aligned to cyber. So if you have that kind of affinity, you could move in there. We hope to see that any sooner. We're not very sure, but we each time when the parliament session happens, we feel okay, this session we should have it, but it hasn't happened. But that's one of the areas which would come in through. So like GDPR, you will have these laws, okay? This is one of the drivers, as I say, okay? The other is by 2025, more than 65% of the organization will invest in enterprise data loss prevention suits. So does that mean organization don't do today? What does that exactly mean? Data loss prevention. So as of today, do you think the organization don't adopt to it? Okay, so let me give you a practical example here. I mean, you would see a lot of enterprises already adopting a control. This is nothing but it's a form of a control, right? What challenges we have seen while we have implemented also. A is we do not understand the data. We're not able to classify the data. The data is so huge. It is residing all over. It is residing in your laptops, to your storage, to your email, to the cloud. The first and foremost is classifying that data, identifying the data, discovering the data. Okay. So until you do not know what data you're going to protect, none of your controls are going to take care of it, right? So you may have certain data. Let's say it's credit card information, right? It's very relevant for, let's say, an organization if they lose customer data and in the form of credit cards, right? Huge loss, right? Somebody can utilize it for various purpose, right? They can siphon off a lot of money. Okay. Now this is a loss, right? It could be an individual loss. Now you may not be very sure if this data is confidential until you have classified that data. So what I would see within the next few years, this would be more effective, right? You have SOC today to identify incidents. Okay. So SOC can identify incident, but until and up till you have controls which actually let you know that this is an incident, right? So if you do not have a DLP, you will never be able to, and an effective DLP as a solution implemented, you will never be able to identify if the incident that has occurred because of data exfiltration has that impacted or has that brought any financial loss to the organization. So you'll see that effectiveness coming soon. Then 2021, you would see 20% of the enterprise organization will adopt dedicated threat and vulnerability management tool. Okay. Tool is one aspect of it. The other one is the program part of it, the process of it, right? You can have tools do vulnerability scan across all your systems, all your networks, all your controls, the assets which we call crown jewels, right? We can do a vulnerability scan to all of it. But what is important is to remediate those vulnerabilities. Now, these are identified and these are governed by the risk management team of your organization, right? Now, if they give a go ahead, you can actually accept a risk, right? Or the business can accept a risk if it is not going to have any kind of financial loss, or it could be, let's say, for a reason an asset goes down, business continuity is impacted, right? So if the business takes that call, you can go ahead with it. But what is very important is to have a program to identify vulnerability, right? It cannot be just tool specific. I may not be completely agreeing to this one piece. It has to go along with a program, and that is process driven. Okay. So you need to have a good VA program defined for the organization, also governed it. And that is where the CISOs come into picture. Earlier, the position of the CISO was not that very strong. It was more from a CIO and CTO perspective that the calls were taken. But now it is also the CISO function that makes the calls, right? By 2021, approximately 75% of the large enterprise will utilize privileged access management products, up from approximately 50% in 2018. Anybody who's heard of what is PAM?
PAM, like from last year, I mean from last 1 year, we have got specific spam emails targeting to high authorities in an organization that it is modifying that the subdomain. And also it is sending us the information about the bank that we have an offer. If you click, then you will get some amount. By mistake, if you click, then your all of the laptop information is going leaked outside.
Anybody who would agree, disagree to what he said? Different view? Wait, I think we've been talking all. Why about the second line? I'm not. Right. Thank you. Okay. Privilege access management. Okay. Now, for any organization, right, you need to give privileges, right? Okay. Somebody has to be given privileges to, let's say, handle the network, handle systems, right? Operate your L3 firewalls or your, L3 routers. Okay. Add access list to it. Okay. Now, these are some of the actions that somebody takes And that can result into a threat or an attack, right? Or it could bring down the networks. Okay, availability, right? So privilege, now these are privilege access given, even on the applications also. Now, a, a third party or an attacker, if he has to handle a certain, or he has to exfiltrate a important data, which is required for him, right? He needs to gain access, right? So if it is a normal user without admin privileges, would he be able to do it? Like, you are an AD user, you do not have accesses beyond certain applications, Word, PowerPoint, and so on. Can you do an action, or can your user account be used for a certain action to, let's say, one scenario, exfiltrate data? Is it possible? You may at the most use his email, upload your file, but that will be caught by your DLP if that control is well defined, right? You may have a file share where you will try and post it, but it sits there. How does it go out? So you will need a privilege account. And in the SOC world, this is one of a very critical use case to look into privilege accounts of an organization, right? So either a user, a normal user, is elevated with privilege access, or a privilege account is used for these activities. So if you see a privilege account off office hours exfiltrating a lot of data out, it should actually ring a bell. Now that action is actually approved. Your firewalls are not going to block it, right? Like, let's say there is a web server and you be able to access the database behind it, right? You're able to SQL inject in and get the data out. A L3 firewall, which you would learn, would allow this, right? An application aware firewall may not allow it because it sees that, okay, why should so much of data get exfiltrated out, right? When your session should have been in some KBs. So there it would block it. But otherwise, if it's a L3 firewall, it would not block because your access list allows you to do. But there is a privilege account that is doing it. So nobody is going to block it, right? So the organization may have not implemented those controls, but since the privilege account is doing it, it's completely approved, right? So identify and see what these privilege account users activities are. So that has to be monitored. So as you rightly said, you don't trust, right? That's one way, is you don't trust that user privilege account, but you don't trust the actions because somebody has got those accounts compromised, right? So that's the second stage. One is the user, like somebody has resigned and he wants to do something of that nature, he would of course do that, right? But that's where you put them into monitoring list. Okay, so what can you do? You actually look into their sessions. You actually look into their activities. When do they log in, right? If there's change in the behavior. So this is one of the user behavior analytics as a use case that we will talk about, right? So we'll look into that. So a very strong privilege access management solution combined with IDAM will be very mandatory for organization. Okay, because in most of the cases we have seen, it is a privilege accounts that is actually getting compromised. Okay. Then about 15% of the large enterprise will use commercial TI service to inform their security strategies, which is an increase from less than 1% 2017. So Ratan also spoke about this, right? What is TI? Threat intelligence, right? Now, again, this is not just tool. This is not just some feeds, okay? Verticals. You've all heard OT, Scada, right? One of the sectors which has been much talked about these days. Okay, we've also seen the the Mumbai grid, right, getting compromised. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of information around it. Okay, these are SCADA systems. Okay, now why I'm picking up this one vertical is if you take a threat intelligence feed or information. Feeds is nothing but information, right? What is information? APT 32, right? It's a threat actor, working somewhere around the Thailand areas, Indonesian areas, right? They are very active in the manufacture sector, right? They bring down the plants. They shut the production of the plant. So we've seen a lot of those scenarios. Okay. Now what happens is since there is a pattern to it, there is an intelligence also built, right? Now, but what am I going to do with that intelligence if your sector is a BFSI or a retail sector? I'm only going to show a lot of noise. It's not that they wouldn't do, I mean, they will not disrupt this sector, but it may not be relevant, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So you cannot bring in a lot of threat intel from a field perspective and start looking at those events with it by a SOC, right? It's going to be overwhelmed data that will be available. So your threat intel programs should be well defined. We call it curation, the curation of this information to context the events, which events comes from various control, is very, very important, because then you reach one step closer to identifying the incident. What is most important in a SOC scenario is identifying the incident. And in most cases, it becomes very difficult because then there's no standard SOPs that you follow, right? There are few, but in some cases, until this intel is not given, there is nothing standard. So you need to give, or you need to work out a proper threat intel program for detection. As simple as this. Some opportunities, we spoke about few. So Indian IT law, RBI SOC mandate has been there for quite long, right? I mean, today you would see all NBFCs, even the cooperative bank, have been asked to align to this mandate, right? Some DSCI support on skill development. You've got DDU GKY, right? One of the premium programs of the government that also gives a lot of these cybersecurity related programs, including IDAM as one of the key skill area. That is also part of it. GDPR, yes, may or may not be relevant to a lot of organization, but that's one. NASSCOM to position India as a global CS hub. These are some of it, right? And there are many more. I mean, not actually being able to update it, but then there are many more that could be some of the drivers that we're speaking about. Some numbers, right? Global security market, cybersecurity market valuation. You can see from 2015 to 2023, it's just on the upward trend. You would see that there would be a lot of these digitalization that would happen, and cyber security trends, valuations is only going to increase. So there are some trends that is defined out here. Key market drivers continued for APAC, right? I'll touch base of a few of them. One is the growing need of user entity behavioral analytics as a service. Now, I've actually clubbed this into the domain of managed security services, right? All organization in some form or the other will have an external organization to support them, which could be a managed service organization, right? So it is not possible for every organization to develop all kind of cyber programs for themselves, right? Let's say be it a bank, you still have some external agencies doing their VAPT, right? Somebody doing their ISO certification, right? Somebody governing their SOC, okay? So there are some of the areas which is offered by the experts, okay? And they come under the purview of managed security services. So Terralogic is one such organization that from where I belong to, we offer a lot of managed security services for customers, right? Now there could be a scenario where the customer says, I have a lot of data, but I need to define user behavior or an entity behavioral based analytics for the data that I have. We can offer it. It could be part of a threat hunting program also, which you heard in the previous sessions, right? So these are all what a managed security services organization do. So there are two ways to look at it. Either be part of these managed security services organization at various levels, or define them within the organization. That becomes a little more complex, right? So we always go to the PwCs, KPMGs, and some other players in the market, okay? Some of the comprehensive frameworks, and you would also cover a few of them. NIST is one of the framework. You'll go extensive. Then you've got the OAPS top 10. You will start off very early in your modules itself, right? COBIT, maybe very limited. Then you've got the cloud security alliances. That is something which you will also cover. And NIST I spoke about. PCI may not be so much, but if somebody has interest, we can always cover that into a capstone project or so. So these are some of the frameworks which you also need to start aligning. Industry 4.0. These are frameworks which you should start reading right away. I mean, these are precursors for your next modules to come up. Again, evolution of threat. I'm not going to take all the earlier days, but I'll speak a little bit on the internet age and the connected age, right? Of course, the internet age, some of the scenarios you already defined, the attack patterns that you've seen, largely it has been DDoS, right? Bring down the services, okay? Compromise to remote access sessions, hijack them, okay? When it comes to connected age, that is the age that we are largely now. We've also seen a lot of interconnection between, let's say, IT and the OT sectors, right? Earlier, the OT sector were completely isolated, so you wouldn't see anything happening out there. But today, the IT actually drives OT, right? Your plant are controlled by the IT systems. So there is that converged layer in between, okay? We spoke a lot about cloud, right? Applications are hosted on the cloud. EC2 instances, Google, right? There are private clouds available, right? So again, it's a connection between, it's a hybrid model between your organization and the cloud. How do you ensure that those are secure, right? We spoke about the API security as well, right? That will be at some point you will see the banks having a lot of interlock, right? Multiple banks connected to each other, the open banking system, which we call about. So these are some of the areas which would only keep on evolving, right? So the connected age is what we speak about. And there are other things as well, right? You got the smart bits that you carry on, right? Which take complete information of you as an individual, right? Where you're traveling, your connected cars. Today, I mean, I hardly can speak about some of these advanced cars that do not have these connected or a telegraphic method or connection, right? Where the information is not passed on, right? Telemetric, sorry. Okay, so that's one of the areas where the threats are only going to increase. Okay, and somewhere we have to identify and sort of start governing them as well, right? Uh, Again, I spoke about this, so I would not cover a lot of it, but this is to uh, give you one perspective. I'm going to talk two of these scenarios. So one is the IT assessment, right, where a standard assessment methodology is used, okay, which is doing a VA and a PT for applications. It could be web-based applications or any kind of application. And how do you do it? Like you start with a network scanning, response analysis to the traffic injected, stress test, and agent installation on machine in the networks as well. So one of the scenario next, which I'm going to talk about, is on the compromise assessment, right? This is largely when systems are compromised. A non-intrusive passive ICS assessment is because you do not have access to it. You don't have visibility to it, right? These protocols are not the standard IP protocols, okay? So your assessments are also going to be very different, right? So how do you do that? That is also something which can be brought in from a project perspective into this program. So at some point you would like to do these projects, what we can do is you can get you aligned to some of these automobile sectors or the other sectors which will allow you to do this as well, in a POC state. Again, getting in deeper, this is the Scada environment that you would actually see, right? So you have the environment in between. If you can see, there is a switch which connects your Scada systems, and on the top is all the IT systems. You have well-defined methodology to handle the IT system. But when it comes to OT, it becomes that very difficult because A, you do not actually get to relate and understand the kind of transactions that happen there, what systems controls, like the PLCs control a lot of these systems downstream, right? Now, if that is compromised, it can bring down the productions also, right? So these days you would see a lot of these programs, including the SOC programs, also monitoring the OT systems. Okay, so that's something which you could bring in as one of the scenarios in the cyber age, which we will talk about, right? So checking on the configurations, the privileges, uh, the switch that connects to various controls out here, the panels out here, what is happening, right? What are the indicators that can be picked up there? So all of it is something that we could speak about. Now, okay, just let me take you to the next slide. This is a post-breach compromise assessment. Okay, it's something that we picked up from a real-time exercise that we did. And what you see out here, right from reconnaissance to the final delivery stage, do anybody know what these phases are or these stages are? What is it called? It's called the attack kill chain. Okay, and that pattern remains for every lateral movement that you would see. It remains the same. Okay, so you have the first stage. I'm not going to take you through all these stages. The first stage, which is reconnaissance, more like a Reiki, right? You just try and understand. You use various tools to know what are the open ports, what are the accesses available, is the firewall, make of the firewall having certain compromise that you can exploit to, and then you start moving in. So what you see here are the systems that are within the organization, and the ones which are yellow, they are all connected systems externally, okay, where we call it the command and control servers, where the data gets posted, exfiltrated, right? So this is a methodology that was looked up when the compromise has happened or is currently going on, right? So we've been able to detect from the endpoint level on the networks, critical controls, and the command and control systems. And an orchestration can actually block it. Like if you have control of your systems, we can get that off the hook from the networks, right? Or if, say, for example, your networks, that is your firewall, which gets compromised, you can actually go and add a rule to the firewall to block that connection, right? So this is an active compromise, which can also be looked at. And we've got some earlier programs where students have developed EDR. You understand what is EDR? Heard of EDR? Endpoint detection and response systems, right? So it is more behavioral based. Okay, it detects 0-day. What is a 0-day? Have you heard of?
Detection and blocking. Same day detection and blocking.
Same day detection and block. Somebody can elaborate in a much more simpler way. Unknown attack, right? Which is not known. So the known attacks can have signatures, right? Which can be identifiable. But 0-day in most cases is not identified. You have to look at some trends, some indicators to identify it, right? To capture that. And that is where the endpoint detection, which is one of the control on the systems, helps you to do it. Different behaviors, right? Different indicators that show, let's say there's a registry entry, okay? That is changed. There is a user privilege that is elevated. These are some actions that you see it on your endpoints, right? So EDR systems allows you to detect. It's completely behavioral based, AI driven methodology that is used. So there have been some of the consultants in the past programs who actually done this. They've defined EDRs, right? Traditionally different from what an antivirus or a anti-malware solution could look into, right? So that's what I wanted to cover, largely just to give you a brief about what we will cover in our program. Some trends, right? Give you some understanding as to what you could look for. In this program, we've seen, consultants move from the existing IT roles to cyber, or it could be InfoSec roles, right? There have been individuals who moved as CISOs for the organizations as well, right? what you get to be here while you're there in this program is connect to a lot of these mentors, right? Who would help you also get your career progression, in the right track. If you think that you want to get into specific areas on cyber or infosec, you can actually take these mentors' help, right? So it's a complete collaborative ways of learning, right? We will need you also to step up. It's not that you are not coming here to just absorb what we say. Okay, we also need to understand what are your line of interest, what you would like to achieve out of this program, right? And we are dynamic. Let's say there are certain topics that you'd like to, go elaborate on. We will take you through some scenarios which you'd like to do. We will allow you to do that, right? Thank you. So I think I'm good.